we just want to try to arm ourselves with some modern scientific, because if God is real, then science should complement or should be supported by what the Bible reveals to us about God. So it's not a scientific manual, but it does speak to his creation. Now we want to get into the lesson this morning. The title of the lesson says Fire from Heaven. Of course, this would be Elijah. Remember, the 450 prophets of Baal said, hey, call your God down here and, get him to do all this. We'll dump all this water. They, doused all the wood and did all, and he gave them 10 times as much time as they needed to pray and all this and that. And all of a sudden, God come down, consumed everything. But we want to look at this guy right here, Baal, and how he influences our world yet today. And so it's a different kind of lesson, if you will. If you bear with me, over in 1 Kings chapter 18, is the account, and again, we're not going to be studying Elijah, but I just want to point you over there to, you can read about the account there, and we'll highlight some aspects of it, but we won't be reading his account. We won't be making any illustrations with his character, if you will. But now let's point back to Exodus chapter 34, and you don't have to flip there if you know. I'm not going to be reading from there, but that's where the children of Israel, God makes a covenant with them for the first time after they've been delivered out of the land of Egypt, and they make this covenant with God. And Moses is up on the mount, and they fashion this golden calf, and God had just commanded them not to worship other gods or graven or molded idols. Those carvings that we talked about this morning. That's basically what the golden calf was. After 40 years of wandering, the generation grew up in the wilderness, was introduced to, who was instructed not to forget God, started to pursue idols that they would be destroyed. And Brother Mike mentioned that was we can find that over in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 11 through 20. But sadly, those were supposed to be the people of God that gave themselves to idols through their history, and they worshiped them even more, entering into the land of promise. And after the division of the kingdom, Jeroboam even went further, and that's what we were studying this morning. And then ultimately, even Judah fell victim to the idolatry, and the southern kingdom was taken into captivity into Babylon for 70 years to purge them of this wicked idolatry. And so one of the predominant idols that we read about in the Old Testament, or we don't really read about, but it's mentioned, is Baal. And there's even several locations named after this character, Baal. So this morning, this lesson is going to be about we're going to look at the worship of Baal. We're going to look at who or what he was, or Yeah, it was a he. And then what was the actual worship of Baal? And I think once we understand that, then we'll understand why we have the imagery that we have there, like in the book of Hosea about the harlotry. And then we'll look at the nature of Baal worship, and then Baal worship versus the worship of God. And we're going to compare, what individuals got out of the worshiping of Baal, and then what they get out of the worshiping of God. And then we'll take all that information and we'll make a application to our world today. And then we'll draw some conclusions, and then we will end things here for this morning. So who is Baal? Who's this individual Baal? It's the name of the most prominent Canaanite deity. Now there's a whole laundry list of deities, and I didn't even bother to print them out or whatnot, but there's a bunch of them. But just be aware that Baal is the predominant one, or the king of the Canaanite deities. He was the god of fertility to the Canaanites. And this is key right here. Key, along with other things, but predominantly he was viewed as the fertility god. Baal's sphere of influence included agriculture, and as well as the procreation of or the gaining of the flock, if you will, animals, husbandry. I guess women would go and find or pray unto Baal for their husbands, and human sexuality. Again, because you can imagine with what comes with fertility would be the actual acts of fertilizing. So that would be some of the things that would be taking place during the worship of Baal. If you live back in that time, this might be the type of image or engraven image or molten image that you might have in your house, or in or that you would see in the temples or in the high places where they worship. And there's some other ones, but they predominantly look like that, or they're holding like some tools or weapons. But that's Baal. Prevailed in the time of Moses among the Moabites and the Midianites. And we see that in Numbers chapter 22, verse 41. And through them, they would spread, they would, again, God wanted them to wipe out those people, so that all this idolatrous behavior would be wiped out in that land of Canaan, but they didn't do that. So they would be spread among them through the Moabites and the Midianites. Baal worship became prominent in the northern kingdom of Israel during the days of King Ahab, which is approximately 874 to 853 BC, somewhere around there. 9th century BC is when it became very prevalent in the 10 northern tribes. And when he married Jezebel of Tyre. And there's the verses that you can go and read about that. It later infiltrated the kingdom of Judah when Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, married the king of Jehoram of Judah. So we talked a little bit about leadership. This was a leadership problem because the leaders of or the government at the time, the leaders of the government, adopted this worship of these idols that permeated down through the rest of the people. So Again, we can see the importance of, or why an organization needs to have strong leadership at the top. It became the religion of the court and the people of the 10 tribes. Again, it replaced basically God. It appears it never had been permanently abolished, even though Elisha, who was represented there in the beginning of our slide, he had conquered the 450 prophets of Baal and basically, annihilated them in amongst the tribes of Israel at that time, but he was not able to totally wipe it out. It just kept on coming back. Places for worship of Baal were often high places or in the hills, consisting of an altar and a sacred tree. We talked about the trees this morning. And a stone or a pillar. And the temples were erected to him, even in Judah. And we see that here in 1 Kings 16:32. And he was worshipped with much ceremony. Now, again, ceremony is a play on words, if you will. He was the god of fertility, so you can imagine what kind of ceremonies they would have been having. Was undoubtedly attractive to the Jews because of the sensual character. In other words, what attracted people to Baal to this type of worship was the gratification that they got. They got, through the sensual activities, they would have the release of endorphins and those things, and that was much more gratifying than worshiping Jehovah God. Even though Jehovah had delivered them up out of the land of Egypt, and for their forefathers, and they had the prophets there testifying before them. They had seen miracles. That would have been all passed all the way down through them, but yet their earthly desires kept on gravitating towards Baal. It was predominantly urban. The predominantly urban Phoenicians built temples to Baal, and while Alea, the queen of Judah, even Jerusalem had a temple dedicated to Baal during her reign. So it was very prevalent during that period of time. And I got all that from the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible. E.H. Peterson, this is what he wrote as far as the nature of Baal worship. The emphasis of Baalism was on psychophysical relatedness and subjective experiences. The gulf between man and God was leveled out of existence by means of participatory rites. The terrifying majesty of God, his otherness as assimilated to the religious passions of the worshiper, the god of the bull image, the god of wine, the god of fertility figurine, was the god of relevance, fulfilled personal needs with convicting immediacy. The desires that inflamed the soul were fulfilled in the cultic act of worship. The transcendence of the deity was overcome in the ecstasy of feeling. So again, it was all about me. It was all about me feeling good during my worship. That's what Baalism is all about. We can make engraving images, we can cut down trees and dedicate part of it and carve it up and say that's what it is we're praying to. But ultimately, I'm worshiping me. Jim's going to feel good today at worship. I'm not worshiping my God unless I feel good. That's Baalism. And we even see that in Christianity today. We call it the charismatic movement, right? So, again, we think that we have abolished Baalism. Baal, he's still around. He's just going under a different name. The prophets accused the people of harlotry. And some of them were committing harlotry. And some of them committing idolatry. Or adultery, I should say. Such had a literal reference to the sacred prostitution of the Baal, of the worship of Baal. So again, it's a representation of how the idea of the prostitution. If you can imagine, especially those that have a loved one. You can imagine how you would feel if your loved one or your mate committed adultery on you, how you would feel. The betrayal that you would feel. Now, that's how God feels when you worship Baal. And that's why the idea of harlotry, Baal was a harlot, because people was going to Baal to get gratified, versus being faithful unto to the covenant relationship that they established with God at Mount Sinai. It also had an application to the entire rationale of the Baal worship. Again, they was physically doing the same thing. Harlotry was worship that sought fulfillment through self-satisfaction. Worship was shaped and formed by the personal needs, desires, and passions of the worshiper. So again, it was all about the worshiper, not Baal. But they would try to convince you otherwise. Such is worship, which says, again, think of co-workers, or even maybe at other congregations, some things that people might say, like, it will satisfy you. Come over to my church. It's what you call it. I remember down in Warner Robins, the Harvest Church. It was a Methodist church, but they basically put on a rock concert every Sunday. And and that's what a lot of people say. It's like, oh man, it's really great. The music's awesome. And they're all jumping, and it just looks like a big concert is what it looks like. And that's what they call worship. Yeah, they probably had a 15-minute sermon, but predominantly it was them jamming and dancing, quote unquote, worship. You might hear them say, do you want a religious experience? Religious experience. Come experience religion. I will give it to you. Do you desire your needs to be fulfilled? I will do it, and in the most alluring fashion possible. Joel Osteen. That's what Joel Osteen sells. When you watch him or hear him on TV, this is the type of religion that Joel Osteen is selling. Comparing Baal to Jehovah, the revealed will of God sets itself firmly in opposition to the taste, preoccupations is man's obsessions, and our idiosyncrasies of men. So, what Baal was all about, God is the complete opposite. In Baalism, worship is stripped to the personal desires of the worshiper. We already pointed that out. Its rule is that worship must be interesting, exciting, and relevant. I've even heard brethren try to say, how can we make our service is more relevant. And I think there was a movement there for a while about holy hands or something, people wanting to hold up hands while singing or whatnot. And down through the years, brethren have talked about, well, can we clap during singing? You know, is that for God or is that for me? Instrumental music during worship. Is God really concerned about the music that's being played, or are the participants at that worship service, are they the ones that are being gratified through the instrumental music? You know, when we do something, we should be asking, what does God receive in this? If the receiver is me, it's probably the wrong type of worship. When it comes to worshiping God, though, Jehovah God, the true God, the living God, nothing is ever done simply for the sake of the religious experience. No act of worship is ever authorized simply to allow somebody to feel good. Name one instance that records that people felt good about worshiping God. None comes to mind. Now, did God want us to be miserable? No. He wants us to be reverent. He wants us to respect Him. But Christianity is about adopting a lifestyle of living a life of being holy. We talked about, on Wednesday evening, we talked about being holy, set apart, you know. So that's what our worship is all about. We learn to behave like Christians in our worship. That's the worship that God wants us to do. Again, Peterson is quoted in saying, the distinction between the worship of Baal and the worship of Yahweh or Jehovah is a distinction between the approach that the will of the covenant God, is a distinction between approaching the will of the covenant God, which could be understood and known and obeyed, and the blind life force in nature, which could only be felt, absorbed, and imitated. No, he's talking about creation. Baal is none of those things. Baal is the worshiping of creation. So how does that apply to us? How do we take this information that we've studied and we've learned, or now that we know what Baalism is all about, that it's all about me. It's not about Baal. It's about me feeling good worshiping Baal. What's some applications? One might assume that I have up here that one might assume that we are far removed from idolatrous worship. Jim, I didn't even know who Baal was until you told me today. Such an assumption would be incorrect, though, would it not? Again, what was Baalism all about? Baal did not die out with the demise of the Canaanites. Baal resurfaces every time a new Ahab, if you will, King Ahab, seeks to rectify emotionless, irrelevant, liturgical, I think that's how you pronounce that, ceremonial worship, or the Lord's Supper. That's liturgical worship. Prayer is that's what we're talking about. Our acts of worship, our ceremonies, our religious rites. That's what that word means. Or still congregations. That was a popular thing down there in Georgia. People would come and visit, and they might attend for a month or two, but then they'd say, I'm just looking for something more for my kids. Well, this church over here, they got a better program for our children. I think our children get more. Again, we don't go to services. I think our children are a secondary effect of attending services. We hope that by us being a good example that they will learn from us, and they do. It's all eyes on me, the fishbowl effect. But we come to worship for us to pay respect unto Jehovah God. That's what we don't go to services. We don't pick a church for our children. We don't pick, it's not Baskin Robbins. Granted, you want to feel welcomed in a congregation. You want to be around a sound congregation. But it's not about how I feel. It should be, how am I worshiping God? So every time somebody tries to, we need to spice things up. Well, why are we spicing them up? What's that spice up for? Is that spice up for God, or is that spice up for me so that I get a little bit of release of endorphins? So that I can go home and pat myself on the back and say, I really worship God today. That's Baalism. There seems to be a certain subjectivism creeping in among some brethren. Those who elevate selfish needs and entertainment above the responses of a thankful heart to God. Have you ever been around, brethren who kind of want to be entertained, or they want to bring in a certain speaker for the gospel meeting, big headliner, if you will. There's nothing wrong with having a good evangelist come in and speak, but again, that shouldn't be our only motivation to seek such an individual out. It should be, we are seeking to either evangelize the lost or to reinforce, to develop the congregation to learn more from God's Word. That's the objective of the gospel meeting, not so that I can be entertained by the speaker who's coming in. We must be careful in our own worship, or our worship can become, instead of a meaningful response to the true God, a show or performance which derives its motivation from will worship. Not Baal worship, will worship. We got to be careful. It's not about me. When we come here, it's about learning. It's about learning the way. It's about learning what Christ done for us. That's what the Lord's Supper is for. It's a memorial meal unto Him, so that we can remember what He did in His sacrifice unto us, and that we have repentance through Him. That's why we come here, and we come to learn how to live the way that He wants us to live, so that we might receive the kingdom of heaven after we transpire here on earth. That's what religion's all about. That's what it's supposed to be about. It's not about feeling good. And I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with feeling good after you come to services. I think there should be an aspect, but if you're looking for the self-gratification, the endorphin high, if you will, of worship, that's not what God would have us to do. That's not what we see prescribed within the Scriptures. And when you hear brethren or people talk about that type of religion, that's Baalism. They're worshiping Baal yet today. So in conclusion, we talked about the worship of Baal. We identified who he was. We even showed a picture of him. And we talked about what that worship was, that he was the god of fertility. And the nature of his worship, that it was all about self-gratification, will worship of me. And then we compared the worship of Baal to the worship of God, and saw that God was a polar opposite of what Baal is. And then we make some applications to our world today. And I think if we just look, it doesn't take much of an imagination to see that Baal is still prevalent within our society today, and even within some congregations as well. And we need to be on guard and make sure that Baal doesn't come into our congregation, because if he does, then we will end up playing the role of the harlot. So, in conclusion, idolatrous worship can be thinly disguised and covered in self-seeking, self-fulfillment worship. Again, worship is not about me, and it's not about you. It's about learning. It's about being reverent unto God. Its participants may be entertained, excited about, or enthusiastic over such worship. I sincerely doubt that such worship can edify the whole church or pleasing our God. In other words, if you're looking for worship that gratifies you, it's probably not going to gratify the person right beside you. So as we depart, the challenge that Elijah issued to Israel before his contest to the prophets, and I think 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21, I think it's still relevant today. It says, "How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him." In other words, follow the true God. And so we want to extend the invitation at this time. The invitation is an opportunity for you